Welcome to Talk Treatises.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're not just looking at a book. We are, I think, looking at what you could call the source code for an entire civilization.
That's a great way to put it.
We're doing a deep dive into the sayings of Confucius, or, as it's more commonly known in the West, the Analects.
And you're absolutely right to call it source code. I mean, for 2,000 years, this collection of sayings and anecdotes, it was basically the operating system for China, for Korea, Japan, Vietnam.
The operating system for everything.
For almost everything. It dictated how you spoke to your father, how you're supposed to rule a kingdom, how you ate your dinner, even how you mourned the dead.
Wow.
It's arguably one of the most influential texts in human history. And yet, in the West, it's so often it's reduced to fortune cookie slogans,
Man who stands on hill with mouth open will wait long time for roast duck to fly in, that kind of thing.
Exactly. That kind of pseudo-profound nonsense, which is a real tragedy, because when you actually sit down and read the text, which is what we're going to do today, you find a man who was, he was radical, he was humorous, he was deeply frustrated, and profoundly human.
Right. This wasn't some serene sage preaching from a golden throne.
Not at all. This was a man trying to save a world that was literally falling apart at the seams.
And that context is key, isn't it? We can't understand the Analects if we just see it as a list of platitudes about being nice.
You can't. It was a desperate response to a world on fire.
So let's set that scene, because the context really is the why behind the whole philosophy. We're talking about, 550 BC?
Roughly, yeah. The end of what's called the spring and autumn period. The source material describes it as the disintegration of the Zhou dynasty.
Okay, so for someone listening, what's a good comparison? How bad was it?
To give you a mental hook, think of something like the Holy Roman Empire in its worst, most chaotic days. Or maybe, for a more modern reference, the feudal anarchy of Game of Thrones, just, without the dragons.
Okay, so you have a figurehead at the top.
Exactly. You had a central emperor who was technically the son of heaven, but in reality, he was a ghost. He had zero military powers, zero political capital. He was a symbol with no substance.
So the center had completely collapsed.
Completely. The real power lay with these vassal states that were constantly at war with one another. But it gets even worse. It wasn't just states fighting other states.
It went deeper than that.
Oh, yeah. Inside those vassal states, the dukes were losing power to their own ministers. It was a kind of fractal collapse of authority. Everyone was stabbing everyone else in the back, from the top all the way down.
And the introduction to the text mentions the 3 clans in Confucius's home state of Lu. This seemed to be a particular obsession for him.
It absolutely obsessed him, because this was his home. In Lu, the rightful duke was a shadow. All the real power had been usurped by 3 families, the Qi, the Meng, and the Shu. And it's crucial to understand they weren't just taking political power.
So what else were they taking?
They were usurping ritual power. And for Confucius, that was even worse.
The text has that detail about them using 8 rows of dancers in their family courtyards. I have to admit, to a modern ear, that sounds a little trivial, like, oh no, they have too many dancers. Why did that matter so much?
It sounds trivial to us, but it was everything to them. Because in that culture, ritual was the language of power. 8 rows of dancers was a privilege reserved strictly and only for the emperor.
So by doing that, they were sending a message.
They were publicly declaring the old rules don't apply anymore. We are the gods now. It would be like a lieutenant general deciding to drive around in a car with the presidential seal on it and flying the flag of the commander-in-chief.
It's treason, but made visible.
Exactly. A visual declaration that the entire hierarchy is broken. The world is fundamentally upside down. Rulers weren't ruling, ministers weren't ministering, fathers weren't fathering.
It was, to quote that recluse from the text, seething and boiling.
A perfect description. And this is the intellectual problem Confucius sets out to solve. How do you restore order to a world of total, absolute chaos without just resorting to more brute force?
Because everyone else was using force.
Right. You had other schools of thought. The legalists basically said, punish them until they obey. Make the laws so harsh no one dares to step out of line. The most said, universal love will solve it. The Taoists said, just withdraw, do nothing. The world is a mess, so leave it.
And Confucius comes along and takes a completely different and frankly weird angle. He says, what, straighten your mat?
In a sense, yes. He argues that political order is a byproduct of internal moral cultivation. You don't impose order from the top down with armies and laws. You build it from the inside out. starting with the individual person.
Let's get into the biography of the man who came up with this, because the source text gives us some really specific, humanizing details. He wasn't born into power or wealth.
No, far from it. He was born around 550 BC in the state of Lu. The text is very clear. He was poor in his youth. There's that famous line where he says, "Because I was poor, I can do many paltry things."
Which implies that a true gentleman, an aristocrat of the time, usually wouldn't know how to do menial tasks. But he did.
Right. It means he got his hands dirty. He worked as a keeper of granaries, then as a superintendent of public fields. He was a low-level civil servant. He was counting sacks of rice and measuring fields.
So he knew how the world actually worked on the ground level.
He did. He married young, around 19, had a son and a daughter. But his career was, well, turbulent is putting it mildly. He eventually rose to be the chief criminal judge in Lu and was apparently very good at it. He strengthened the Duke's power so much that a neighboring state, the state of Qi, got jealous.
And this is one of my favorite anecdotes from the historical context. Qi wants to sabotage Confucius's reforms, but they don't send an army. They don't send assassins. They send a distraction.
A very specific and very clever distraction. They send 80 beautiful, talented singing girls and 120 magnificent horses. They send them as a gift to the Duke of Lu.
It sounds like a plot from a comedy, but it actually worked.
It worked perfectly. The Duke of Lu was so entranced, he completely neglected his duties for 3 days to watch the girls and listen to the music. He just checked out. Confucius, disgusted by this total lack of moral seriousness, resigned his post. And that's what kicks off the wandering years.
This is the heart of the story for me. This brilliant man then spends 13 years essentially homeless.
13 years. Just going from state to state way, Sung Chen Chai, trying to find a single feudal lord who would listen to him, who would implement his philosophy of governance.
And he failed.
Over and over and over again. He was mocked. He was nearly starved to death. At one point, he was surrounded by hostile troops in a place called Quang and thought he was going to be killed. He looked, as one observer famously put it, like a stray dog.
That stray dog comment is just brutal. But what's so fascinating is Confucius's reaction to it when he's told.
He laughs. He doesn't get offended. He says, "The description of my appearance is unimportant, but to say I looked like a stray dog, it is true. It is true." He had enough self-awareness and humor to see the absurdity of his own position.
A man with the solution to save the world, and nobody wanted to buy it.
But he never gave up. He never became bitter. He eventually returns to Lu in his old age, not to rule, but to teach and to edit the ancient classics. He realizes his legacy isn't going to be in politics, but in culture. And the Analects, the book we have, is the record of those conversations with his disciples during those final years of teaching.
Okay, so let's get into the meat of that philosophy. The text seems to revolve around a few really heavy-hitting concepts. The first one, and maybe the most misunderstood, is Li.
Li, yes.
It's usually translated as ritual or propriety or good form. And I have to be honest, when modern readers hear the word ritual, I think they check out. It sounds like stiff, empty etiquette, use the correct salad fork, bow at a 45-degree angle. It feels restrictive and kind of pointless.
That is the number one misconception, and it's a huge barrier. But for Confucius, Li is so much more than manners. It is, well, you could almost call it the binding force of a humane society. Think of Li not as etiquette, but more like the choreography of social harmony.
Choreography, I like that word.
If everyone in a dance knows their steps and knows the steps of the people around them, there are no collisions. There's grace. If you know the proper way to greet your neighbor and he knows how to greet you back, there is no friction. The friction-reducing lubricant of society, it makes living together possible.
There's that very specific detail in Book X, the one describing Confucius's personal behavior. If his mat was not straight, he would not sit down.
That's a crucial line. It's so easy to dismiss.
Right. To a modern ear, that sounds like obsessive-compulsive disorder.
It does, but in the Confucian framework, the external order both reflects and creates internal order. The idea is, if your physical environment is chaotic, if your mat is crooked, then your mind is probably not properly aligned either. You can't perform your moral duty if you can't even take the time to align your seat with the basic geometry of the room.
It reminds me of that modern military idea, you know, the famous speech by Admiral McRaven about making your bed first thing in the morning. That one small act of discipline creates the structure for bigger acts of discipline later in the day.
It's precisely that. It primes the mind for order. And Li's is also about humility. There's a great anecdote where Confucius enters the great temple. And he asks about everything he sees. He asks about the placement of the sacrificial vessels, the types of arrows used, the ritual movements.
And someone in the crowd sneers at him.
Right. Someone whispers, "Who is this son of a villager from Su who claims to be an expert on the rites?" He has to ask about everything.
The implication being, if he was a real expert, he wouldn't need to ask. He should already know.
That was the critic's assumption. But Confucius overhears this, and his response is just brilliant. He says, asking is the right.
Oh, I love that. So the ritual isn't just knowing the answer. The ritual is the act of reverence shown by caring enough to ask in the first place.
Exactly. It shows that lie isn't about arrogance or showing off how much you know. It's about submitting yourself to a tradition that is larger than you are. It's about paying attention. But, and this is important, he wasn't a blind, rigid traditionalist. He was deeply practical.
Right, there's the example of the linen cap.
Yes. The ancient rite dictated that you wear a ceremonial cap made of silk. But over time, silk got expensive and people started wearing linen caps instead because they were cheaper. And Confucius says, essentially, that's fine, it's more frugal. I follow the majority on that.
So he's not rigid just for the sake of being rigid. He's okay with updates that make sense.
He is. But then he immediately draws a line in the sand. The old custom was also to bow at the bottom of the stairs before you ascended the dais to speak to the prince. People had gotten lazy and started bowing only after they were already up on the dais with him.
Because it's physically easier, I suppose. Less movement.
It's lazy, yeah. But more than that, it was arrogant. It subtly changed the physical relationship between the subject and the ruler. It erased a moment of deference. So Confucius says, though I must stand alone against the majority, I will continue to bow below.
So he's flexible on the material of the cap, which is a matter of expense, but he's rigid on the moral posture of the bow.
Perfect. Lie is about the spirit of the action, not just the rote memorization of the rules.
Okay, so lie is the external form, the choreography, but the engine driving it, the feeling behind it, is Ren.
Ren, that's the one. Love, benevolence, human-heartedness. This is the core virtue of the whole system, and it's the hardest concept to pin down, mainly because Confucius himself rarely defines it directly.
He seems to define it more by what it is not.
He does. He says things like smooth words and a fawning look are rarely found with Ren.
Which is a pretty clear warning against slick talkers and empty charisma.
A huge warning. Ren is the internal quality that makes Li's authentic. Without Ren, the ritual is just an empty pantomime. It's a robot going through the motions. You bow, but inside you feel nothing. That's not lead.
He does give one powerful definition, though, to his favorite disciple, Yanhui.
He does. He says Ren is to conquer self and turn to courtesy.
Conquer self. That's strong language. It implies a battle.
It is a battle. It's the daily battle against your own ego, your greed, your laziness, your pride. And it's a constant one. You don't win it once and then retire. You have to fight it every single day in every interaction.
But there's a real optimism in Confucius about this, isn't there? He seems to believe we can win that battle.
A profound optimism. He says, if a man were to give his strength to love for just one day, I have seen no one whose strength would fail him.
Meaning we all have the capacity for it. It's not some superpower.
Yes. He believes virtue is possible for every single person. But it's rare because we lack the will, not because we lack the strength. We simply choose the easy path of selfishness too often.
This connects directly to the golden rule, doesn't it? What he calls the single thread.
The single thread? It's a great moment. One day he tells his disciples, there is one single thread binding my entire way together. And then he just leaves.
And they're all left scratching their heads.
Totally confused. They ask one of the senior disciples, Sengzu, what on earth did he mean? And Sengzu explains that it's simply this: faithfulness and fellow feeling.
And the text gives us the specific phrasing for that fellow feeling. Do not do unto others what thou wouldst not have done to thee.
The negative formulation of the golden rule. Reciprocity.
It's interesting to compare that to the Christian golden rule, which is positive. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Confucian version seems more, restrained. Or maybe cautious.
It is about restraint. It's about not imposing your will on others. The logic is, I don't necessarily know what you want, but I have a pretty good idea of what you don't want. You don't want to be hurt. You don't want to be lied to. You don't want to be stolen from.
So it starts from a place of preventing harm.
Exactly. It transforms Ren from some abstract, gooey feeling into a concrete, practical guide for daily action. If you don't want to be insulted, don't insult other people. If you don't want to be ignored, don't ignore other people. It creates a baseline of safety for all social interaction.
So we have the form, Li, and the spirit, Ren. And the person who successfully combines these two is the Junzi.
Gentleman or the superior person.
Now, gentleman in English today sounds a bit dated, like a guy in a top hat opening a door for a lady, or just a polite guy at a party. But Junzi is something much, much heavier.
So much heavier. Historically, before Confucius, Junzi simply meant son of a ruler. It was a class term. It meant aristocracy. If you were a Junzi, you were born into the elite. You inherited your status.
But Confucius's great innovation, and this was truly revolutionary for his time, was to completely repurpose that word.
He hijacked it. He redefined it to mean a moral aristocrat.
So he democratized the whole idea of nobility.
Exactly. He says you aren't born a Junzi. You become one through relentless self-cultivation. A peasant can be a Junzi if he has virtue. A prince can be a small man if he lacks it. Your character, not your bloodline, is what matters.
And he's constantly contrasting this Junzi, the gentleman, with the sharer and the small man.
The comparison is the bedrock of his ethical teaching. He lays it out in dozens of ways. The gentleman seeks right. The small man seeks gain. The gentleman is dignified but not proud. The small man is proud but not dignified.
And a gentleman asks of himself, the small man asks of others. That's a brutal call for personal responsibility.
It really is. The small man is always blaming the world. He blames the economy, he blames his boss, his parents, bad luck. The gentleman looks inward first and asks, where did I fail? How can I be better? It's a mindset of radical ownership.
There's a metaphor about the gentleman that I found really interesting and a little counterintuitive.
A gentleman is not a vessel, or sometimes translated as not a utensil.
The gentleman is not a pot?
Right. Explain that, because usually we think being useful is a good thing. A useful vessel is a good vessel.
But a pot has a very specific use. You hold water in it. You can't use it to cut wood. A hammer is great for nails, but terrible for making soup. A specific tool has a limited fixed function. A specialist is a kind of tool.
Ah, I see.
Confucius is saying that a gentleman is not a specialist with a single technical function. He is a broad, adaptable, moral agent.
That feels incredibly relevant today in a world of hyper-specialization. We're all trying to become better utensils, better coders, better accountants, better surgeons. Confucius seems to be saying, that's fine, but don't just be a tool.
Exactly. Because a tool has no moral compass of its own. A tool can be used by anyone, for good or for evil. A brilliant accountant can help a charity save lives or help the mafia launder money. The skill is amoral. The gentleman, however, has the moral agency to judge the end, not just perfect the means. He's not defined by his job description, but by his character.
And this leads us directly into governance, because for Confucius, you cultivate this gentlemanly character not just to feel good about yourself, but to be able to rule the world.
The two are absolutely inseparable. Politics is just ethics writ large. If the ruler is a gentleman, the state will naturally become ordered. If the ruler is a small man, no amount of laws or punishments will ever save the state from chaos.
There's that famous conversation with his disciple Dulu about this. The Prince of Wei is waiting for Confucius to come and take over his government. And Dulu, who's very practical, asks, okay, master, what's the very first thing you're going to do?
And Confucius gives an answer that sounds like a distinct letdown to a rash warrior like Dulu. He says, the first thing necessarily is the rectification of names.
Putting names right, Dulu basically laughs at him. He calls it wide of the mark and impractical. He's thinking about taxes or armies or building walls, and Confucius is talking about vocabulary.
He is. But Confucius then lays out a logic chain that is terrifyingly tight. Listen to the progression. If names are not right, speech does not accord with reality. If speech does not accord with reality, affairs cannot be carried on to success. If affairs cannot be carried on, rights and music will not flourish. If rights and music do not flourish, punishments will not be just. If punishments are not just, the people will not know how to move hand or foot.
So if you call a bribe a lobbying fee, or you call an invasion a special military operation, or you call a lie an alternative fact, you're breaking the fundamental mechanism of reality.
You're poisoning the well of language. And for Confucius, governance begins with language. If a father isn't acting like a father should, if he's abusive or negligent, he shouldn't be called father. If a ruler isn't ruling justly, he isn't a bad ruler. He is by definition not a ruler. He's just a bandit in a nice robe. The title must match the reality.
It's a powerful anti-propaganda tool.
It is. If you allow the language to rot, the entire society rots from the head down. Confucius is saying we cannot even begin to solve our problems if we cannot describe them accurately and honestly.
He also has some very strong views on how to control the people once you have the names right. And it doesn't involve a lot of legislation?
No. This is the great debate between rule by law and rule by virtue. He puts it very clearly. He says, guide the people by laws and align them by punishment, and they will try to shun crime, but they will have no sense of shame.
Meaning they'll only focus on trying to avoid getting caught.
Right. It just becomes a game. How close to the line can I get without technically crossing it?
Yeah.
There's no internal moral transformation. It's all external coercion.
But, he says, guide them by virtue and align them by courtesy. They will not only have a sense of shame, but they will also grow to be good.
Right. If you rule by Li and by your own moral example, the people develop a conscience. They internalize the good. He uses that famous wind and grass analogy. The gentleman's moral character is the wind, and the character of small men is the grass. As the wind blows, so must the grass bend.
It puts a tremendous burden on the leader, though. You can't just pass a law and walk away. You have to personally embody the virtue you want to see.
Which is why he praises the ancient sage King Shun for ruling by wu wei, which means non-action or effortless action. The text says Shun simply made himself respectful and faced south. And the empire was well governed.
That sounds almost magical, like he's not doing anything.
It is the magic of supreme moral authority. His moral gravity was so immense that order naturally arranged itself around him without him having to issue a single command. We see glimpses of it in history leaders who inspired just by their presence. For Confucius, that was the ultimate political goal.
I want to shift and talk about the people around Confucius. Because reading the source text, it's not a monologue, it's a series of interactions. And his disciples are such distinct, vivid characters.
They really are. And seeing Confucius through their eyes is what humanizes him. He isn't a marble statue. He's a teacher dealing with a classroom of very different and sometimes very difficult students.
Let's start with Yanhui, the teacher's pet, the star pupil.
The tragic figure. Yanhui is the only one Confucius ever credits with truly loving learning for its own sake. He was incredibly poor. The text says he had a single bowl of rice, a single gourd of water, living in a mean alley. But he never let his poverty affect his joy. He was the living embodiment of the internal peace that Confucius preached.
And he dies young.
He dies tragically young, probably in his 30s. And this is one of the only times in the entire Analects where we see Confucius completely lose his composure. When he hears Yanhui has died, Confucius cries out, "Heaven has undone me! Heaven has undone me!"
The other disciples actually criticize him for grieving too much, don't they?
They do. They say, "Sir, you are giving way to excessive grief," which is a polite Confucian way of saying, you're making a scene. Mm-hmm. This isn't dignified. It's not proper Li.
And he just snaps back at them.
He does. He replies, "Am I giving way to excessive grief? If I did not give way for this man, for whom should I ever give way?" It's just heartbreaking. He saw Yanhui as the one student who truly understood, the one who could carry the torch of his teaching into the future. He later says, there are some sprouts that blossom, but never bear fruit. It's the ultimate tragedy of potential unfulfilled.
Then you have the complete foil to Yanhui. You have Dulu.
Oh, I love Sulu. If Yanhui is the quiet saint, Zulu is the loud soldier. He's the rash warrior. He's brave, unrefined, brutally honest. He's the one who is constantly challenging Confucius, arguing with him, questioning him.
And Confucius is always chiding him, putting him in his place.
Constantly. There's a great scene where Confucius is feeling down and says, "If my way does not prevail and I were to take a raft out onto the sea, the one who would follow me would be Zulu." And Zulu gets this big smile on his face. He's so happy about this compliment. He thinks, yes, I am most loyal.
And then Confucius immediately tuts him down.
Immediately. He adds, he loves daring more than I do, but he lacks judgment. It's this perfect teacher-student dynamic of affection mixed with exasperation.
Confucius actually predicts Zulu's violent death, doesn't he?
He does. He looks at Zulu's aggressive, warlike nature and says something like, "A man like that will not die a natural death in his bed."
And historically, what happened?
It came true. Zulu was killed in a coup attempt, fighting to defend his lord. But the legend of his death is so perfectly Confucian. He was surrounded and outnumbered, and in the fight, the strap of his ceremonial hat was cut. He stopped fighting in the middle of a battle for his life to carefully retie the tassel of his hat.
You're kidding?
No. His last words were supposedly, "A gentleman does not die with his cap awry."
Wow. He died for Li, even in the final moment.
He did. He was rough around the edges, but he absorbed the deepest teaching to the very end.
And what about the man himself? The text gives us all these demystification details that show the human behind the sage.
Book X is amazing for this. It's almost like a list compiled by an assistant. It's just his personal habits. He did not eat meat that was not properly cut. He did not speak while eating nor in bed.
He would not sing on a day that he had wailed at a funeral.
Which shows his emotional sincerity, right? If he was truly sad in the morning, he didn't fake happiness in the afternoon. He was consistent. And above all, he was humble. He explicitly says, "I am a teller and not a maker." He didn't claim to be some prophet inventing a new philosophy. He claimed he was just trying to restore the lost wisdom of the ancient sage kings, like King Wen and the Duke of Chao.
He also seemed to have a real sense of humor about his own failures and his own situation.
The stray dog comment we mentioned, it shows he wasn't full of himself. He knew he was out of step with his time, and he could laugh about it. He never claimed to be a sage himself. He only claimed to love learning.
This brings us to the broader historical context of his competition. He wasn't the only thinker out there, and we see him physically bumping into these recluses.
This is a crucial contrast. These were the proto-Taoists. These were men who looked at the same chaotic world Confucius saw and came to the opposite conclusion. They said, "It's hopeless. The system is too broken to fix. The only sane thing to do is to withdraw to the mountains and live a simple life as a farmer."
There's that great story of the encounter with the two men working in the fields, Changchu and Qini. Confucius sends Dulu to ask them for directions to the ford, the place to cross the river.
And instead of giving directions, they start mocking him. They recognize him as a disciple of Confucius, and they say, "The whole world is a seething, boiling flood. Who can possibly change it? Rather than following a man who flees from this lord to that lord, you should follow us, who flee from the world itself."
They're telling him to give up, to stop trying to fix a fundamentally broken system. They're saying Confucius is just running from one bad ruler to another. We're smarter. We're running from society itself.
And Confucius's response to this, when Zulu reports back, is, for me, the most profound and defining moment in the entire book. Confucius sighs, and he says, "I cannot herd with the birds and the beasts."
Meaning, I'm a human being, not an animal.
Precisely. I am a human being. My place is with other human beings. And then he delivers the killer line. "If the way prevailed in the world, I should not have to take part in trying to change it."
Wow.
He's admitting the world is awful. But he's saying, essentially, it is because the world is broken that I have a duty to stay and try to fix it. If everything were perfect, I could happily retire. But it's not, so I can't.
This is the fundamental split between the Confucian and Taoist worldviews. Confucianism engages. It chooses to stay in the messy, corrupt, political, human world and work for change.
It's the philosophy of social responsibility to its very core.
And that engagement eventually paid off, not in his lifetime, certainly, but later.
Massively. Centuries after his death, this text became the core curriculum for the Chinese civil service examinations. For over 1,000 years, if you wanted a position in the government, you didn't need to be born a nobleman and you didn't need to be rich. You needed to memorize and internalize the Analects.
It created a meritocracy based on learning.
A text-based meritocracy. And that goes right back to Confucius himself. He said, "From the man who brings a bundle of dried meat upwards, I have never refused instruction." A bundle of dried meat was the absolute cheapest tuition fee you could possibly give. He taught anyone who is sincere and willing to learn, regardless of their social class. That idea that education and virtue, not birth, should create the ruling class is his most lasting and radical legacy.
But there are still so many misconceptions. People often think of him as a rigid, stuffy conservative.
And he was conservative in that he loved the traditions of the past, but he was complete radical in his application of those traditions. He wanted to overthrow the hereditary aristocracy and replace it with an aristocracy of virtue. That is a deeply revolutionary idea. He was basically telling the dukes of his time, you don't deserve your power unless you are a good person. That is not a conservative message.
And the other big one is that people think he was religious.
Yeah, that's a huge misunderstanding. He was actually quite agnostic, or at least intensely focused on this world. When Zulu asks him about how to serve the spirits and gods, Confucius says, you cannot even serve men properly. How can you hope to serve spirits?
And when asked about death,
he says, we do not yet know life. How can we possibly know death? His entire focus was on the here and now, the secular, social, human world. How do we live together right now?
He respected the ghosts, but he kept them at a healthy distance.
Respect the spirits, but keep them at a distance. That's the perfect summation. It's profound wisdom.
So we have this massive interlocking system of thought. Ritual, benevolence, the gentleman, the rectification of names. It's a complete package for living in society.
It is. It's a powerful demand that we take our social roles seriously. that we realize we don't exist in a vacuum. We are all fathers, sons, friends, citizens. And every single one of those roles carries with it profound moral obligations.
And now for our thought experiments.
My favorite part.
And a quick disclaimer. These are purely for entertainment and educational purposes only. We are taking these ancient ideas and throwing them into the modern meat grinder.
Let's see what comes out.
Experiment 1. The rectification of names in the age of AI.
Oh, this is good. I like this.
So imagine a government or maybe a global tech company creates a governance algorithm, and it's programmed strictly with Confucius's rectification of names principle. It monitors all digital communication and all professional statuses.
Okay, so the core logic is if the name doesn't match the reality, the system acts.
Exactly. Let's say you have the job title journalist in your social media bio or your email signature. The AI analyzes your public output. If it finds that you're consistently producing content that doesn't verify truth or is purely partisan gossip, the system automatically deletes your title. You physically cannot use the word journalist anymore. You are reclassified as pundit or storyteller or maybe just propagandist.
I can see that. What about a teacher? If the AI analyzes student outcomes and engagement and finds a teacher is just reading from slides without inspiring virtue or ensuring comprehension, they are automatically reclassified as data dispenser or proctor.
Right. The logic is that if names aren't right, affairs go wrong. So the consequence of this would be, what? A total societal collapse, followed by a new, rigid semantic utopia.
It would be absolute chaos at first. Think of our politicians. If a representative is found by the AI to not actually represent the statistical views of their constituents, they lose the title. They become delegate or party agent. If a news network offers more opinion than fact-based news, its name is forcibly changed to the opinion network.
It creates a world where you literally cannot hold a job title unless you fulfill the Platonic, or in this case, Confucian, ideal of that role.
It sounds incredibly dystopian, but there's also something weirdly refreshing about it. It forces a kind of brutal honesty. We live in a world of semantic drift, where powerful words like freedom, justice, and safety are often used as weapons to mean whatever the speaker wants them to mean. Confucius would say that's precisely why our justice is failing. This AI would force us all to earn our nouns.
Okay, experiment 2, the ritual of digital existence.
Applying lie to the internet. This should be interesting.
We take that specific detail. If his mat was not straight, he would not sit down, and we apply it rigorously to user experience or UX and all digital communication.
So the premise is that external form creates internal morality.
Right. Currently, the entire internet is designed for frictionless, impulsive usage. Doom scrolling is infinite. Posting is instant. There are no barriers. Confucius would argue this total lack of friction encourages the small man inside all of us. It appeals to our basest impulses, not our capacity for reflection.
So a gentleman's internet would have to introduce deliberate friction.
Radical friction. Before you can post a comment on an article, you have to straighten your robes. Maybe the interface forces you to pause for 60 seconds and displays your comment back to you with the question, is this conducive to harmony? Maybe you have to rewrite your comment 3 times to ensure it meets a standard of benevolent speech.
If your grammar is poor, the lie of language, or your formatting is sloppy, you literally can't post. The submit button is grayed out.
Exactly. It would be a kind of social credit system, but not based on obedience to the state. It would be based on your aesthetic and moral grace. If you troll, it's not just seen as annoying, it's viewed as a fundamental breakdown of cosmic order. You are actively creating discord. Your access gets limited.
The outcome would be a very, very quiet internet.
But a very polite and thoughtful one.
It really highlights how much our current technology is designed to cater to impulse. Confucius was all about creating a pause, a space between the initial impulse and the final action. That's the space where lean lives. And we've almost completely erased that space.
We have. And maybe we need to straighten our digital mats a little bit.
I think we probably do.
So bringing this all home, what does this ancient text mean for us today? We aren't living in the Chow dynasty. We don't wear silk caps. We don't have vassal states fighting in our backyard. Well, not literally anyway.
Well, but we are living in a world that, for many people, feels seething and boiling. We see our institutions crumbling. We see a profound lack of trust in our leaders and in each other. We see people in leadership roles who don't act like leaders. And Confucius reminds us that the solution isn't just a new policy or a new law or a new election.
It has to start with the self.
It has to start with the self. It starts with your immediate relationships. How do you treat your parents? How do you treat your coworkers, your subordinates? Are you consistent? Are you just a vessel defined only by your job? Or are you a complete human being striving for rent?
The text ends with a final powerful thought. He that does not know the bidding cannot be a gentleman.
The bidding, sometimes translated as destiny or the mandate of heaven. It's this idea that there's a moral arc to the universe, and a true gentleman have to understand it and align himself with it. You have to find your proper role in the cosmos.
And that, I suppose, is the final challenge for all of us, to find that single thread in our own lives, to find that balance between the external form and the internal love.
And to keep going, to keep trying to make things better, even when you feel like a stray dog, even when the world rejects your ideas.
And then, especially then.
Especially then.
This has been a Talk Treatises Deep Dive. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.